welcome back to the Beyond Broadcast podcast, a show which takes a behind-the-scenes look at industry professionals and their lives working in the broadcasting and entertainment industry. Today, I'm speaking with TV and audio producer Rhys Gunter. Rhys's career has taken him from community radio in Weymouth all the way to working across the BBC, GB News, Talk TV, ABC Australia, and major live events like Glastonbury. It's a pretty varied career, and we're going to discuss his journey into building a career across radio, television, podcasting, and live media, producing high-pressure national broadcasts, success of the true crime podcast Dear Rachelle, and why modern media now demands creators who can work across media. Welcome to the show, Rhys. A pleasure to have you, mate.
Yeah, great to see you, Jamie. It's been a while.
It's been a long time, mate. It's kind of like a nostalgic factor as well. Even just hearing your voice, mate. You haven't got an Australian twang, which I'm really surprised about.
Yeah, no, I think people are surprised because I've never actually lived in Wales, but I still have a bit of the twang from my mum and dad, but because they're fully Welsh, but we were brought up in the south coast of the UK, so I have a bit of the twang. And then coming out here, trying to explain Weymouth, Wales, no one understands it, so I just say Wales.
That's a safe bet, mate. So when you look at your career so far, looking back at everything, did you imagine you'd be sipping flat whites in Sydney and working at one of the largest media companies in Australia? That must be a bit of like a foreign thought even now. Like it must be a bit strange.
It is crazy, really. Like you every time like you go past the Opera House or get on the ferry, go over the bridge or something like that, you do think, wow, I live here. Like I think it's the best city in the world. I always do think that. But it was always something that I wanted to do moving to Australia. I've always wanted to come and do it for a year or two or travel it. And I had the option when I was in university to come out here and do study abroad in Melbourne for 6 months. And I was just about to go. I passed all the exams and was just about to go. And then a week before I pulled out. Just because my career was taking off a bit, like I was getting some work in the UK, and actually I think I was a bit scared and a bit naive as well, and I pulled out, and I've always regretted that decision. So I always thought one day I'll go and do it properly, and I'm glad I've done it now.
I'm curious, mate, was the reasoning that you didn't end up making the jump that early on, was it because of the fact that you felt like it would stagnate your career by going over too early, or what was the kind of mindset for you? Or was it just a case of like, it's a long way away, do I really want to make that move now?
I think it was a mixture of both. I think at the time, what was I, 19 as well? I was young. I was just getting work at Talk Radio, part of News Corp. I was at Love Sport, obviously, when we met. I was starting to get these little jobs along the way. And I just thought, if I leave now for 7-8 months, come back, I'm back to square one. I'm back to finding contacts again. I'm back to, people would have moved, friends would have moved out of the house I was in. I'd kind of not be on my own again, but it'd kind of feel a bit like that. And I just thought, you know what, it's too much of a jump. So to my lecturer's disappointment, to my dad's disappointment, I decided not to do it. But yeah, I've always regretted it, but glad. I think now doing it and having the experience, and like you're older, people out here are a similar age that are expats as well. So it seemed the right time.
And it seems like every decision you've made has been quite intentional. And growing up in wee Weymouth, it's kind of interesting to see that you took some pretty early steps into radio at a very young age. So how is it that you came to step through the doors of Air 107.2 at 13 years old? It's a pretty young age to be even thinking about jumping behind the mic.
Yeah, no, that was... I don't know how that all came back. I remember seeing that Air, because before I joined, during the time I was there, it was just an online student radio station, community radio station, basically. So, and I wanted to get involved. It was literally 5 minutes from my house. Like it was something to do, and I absolutely loved it. Never done radio before. Always loved music. Always loved kind of being behind a mic, I think. And then I just grew from there, learned to love it a bit more. And then all of a sudden, then it went on to FM and was part of that launch. And then from there and there and there, I was there for about 3.5 years at the end. Presented for various shows, looked after programming, visualization. It was such a fun, great team at that age. Like I remember on a Saturday and Sunday morning, I'd have school in the week, and Saturday and Sunday I'd be up at 7 o'clock to do breakfast show at 8 a.m. But I wouldn't care because I loved it, and it just gave you that love and that buzz. And I wouldn't be able to have had a career in radio, gone to uni, if it wasn't for Air. So I always say community radio is an amazing opportunity to get involved with it, and you can do so much.
So you would say that during those younger years, like doing that radio, obviously almost making it a hobby of yours, definitely gave you a pretty significant leg up coming into your later career. Would you say that's pretty an accurate statement?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. I would say that taught me a lot. It teaches you how to present, how to produce, how to edit. I was doing all that stuff in my spare time, messing about anyway, but you're doing it real practice there. It was like not only that we was learning a lot, but it was good fun as well.
And what did like teenage Rhys think working in radio was going to be compared to probably like what it's being like now for you and your career and like podcasting and radio? Did you have this kind of rose tinted glasses of what your career would look like, or did you kind of have a bit of realism even that early on?
I think teenage Rhys thought that he would be working at Radio 1 in music radio, producing a music radio show, and all of this. Never thought I would want to be a presenter or anything really. But before I'd be producing blah, 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 blah. Little did teenage Rhys know about speech radio and talk radio. Didn't even knew it existed, if I'm honest, until I went to university. And then that's where it came from there. And then I find myself listening to speech radio more than music radio these days. Listen to a lot of podcasts, obviously. So it's funny how, one door can open up so many and realize actually how much of a more opportunity of different formats there are to one industry.
And community radio often forces you to learn a little bit of everything, and it's very much a do-it-yourself attitude. At any point, did you feel like anyone was pushing you in that direction, or did you feel like it was very much your own kind of like enthusiasm that kind of drove you into learning a lot of the skills that you've got now?
I think I was pushing it, and as well, like it was such a small team there at the time. Like we were all teaching ourselves. There was one guy there who was in charge of it. He's a great guy called Carl Greenham, and he was in charge of the station manager of the station. He was station manager. He was also a teacher at a local school at the time, and he had worked at Virgin Radio back in the day on Chris Evans' show when Chris was on that Virgin years and years ago. So he had this kind of radio experience. So he was teaching us a lot of that, and teaching us how to seg, how to speak up to the vocal, all of that sort of stuff. So he taught us all of those basics that meant so much later down the track.
And I love that because it's kind of like having an old head coming in really does add another layer and level of things. And by 17, as you said, because you've been there for a couple of years, you're already leading programming and visualization quite early on. So why is it that you took, even in that kind of earlier year, a much more technical kind of look in broadcasting? Many people, as you say, early on, you were thinking about Radio 1 presenting a music show, but why is it that you kind of early on even saw like the kind of benefits of being a little bit more technical compared to just purely being a talking voice?
I think that was because I was a bit obsessed with Radio 1 back in the day, and they were using visualization as like a kind of first in the industry. Like I remember you'd go on to the BBC website, watch Radio 1, you could see the music video in between when the presenters were speaking. So I was a little bit obsessed with that. So I thought, let's try and replicate that here. And a massive mission for a little community radio station with a couple of webcams, but we had a go. It was good fun. Do you know what I mean? Like we did a lot of fun things, and they just gave me some money. Oh yeah, go and do it. I'm up in the roof putting all these cables in, all that sort of stuff. And then the programming side of things, that was something that I wanted to do because I think I've always kind of thought about the station as a whole as well, and there wasn't anyone doing that. And it was I didn't really know what I was doing, if I'm honest. But you wing it at that age and go with the flow.
Do you think this is kind of like maybe a common misconception or sometimes an underestimation of like the value of learning the operational side of like working in media and working in broadcasting? Do you find that a lot of your peers at this point maybe don't have the technical knowledge that you have, or are you finding now the younger generation are taking it a bit more in their stride?
I think you meet people along the way that are bosses. There's bosses on both sides of the camp, people above you that know every single detail, would know how to edit, would know how to program, and there's some that would not have a clue on how to do any of that. And I think it's really important that you can do the jobs that you're asking people to do. I think that's so important to have that understanding as well. You never want to ask someone to do anything that I can't do myself, because everyone has to jump in the deep end and do some of the shit jobs, some of the things that no one else wants to do. Write a script here, cut this music thing here. Like we all have to cut in and do it. So I think for a boss or someone like that to be able to do everything else that you're asking your team to do is so important, and I value that as a boss. And I think that is something that eventually one day, if I ever become a boss or something like that, I would love to be able to do that as well and be able to get stuck in no matter what to help the team out. But I think you do meet people that can't do that sort of stuff. I think more and more now you see producers my age who can do everything, and that's because the nature of the industry is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and you have to become so multi-skilled.
Definitely. And I think the thing I found interesting as well is the fact that, yeah, as I mentioned at the very beginning, it seems like every decision you made was very strategic. And by 2016, you'd moved to London. You went to the University of Westminster for radio and audio production. At that point, even, like, did you feel like you were miles ahead of a lot of the other students who were kind of coming pretty fresh, like off the boat, straight out of school, and were just like, okay, I'm going to come in and learn this stuff, but like I've never even touched a mixing desk or don't even know kind of like, I don't know, good mic etiquette? Was it kind of funny for you in those first couple of weeks, like looking at the other students?
Yeah, but I think, look, I'm never going to be that person and be, I know better than you or anyone like that. I'm never that sort of guy or anything like that. And you learn a lot from people there. And that was the great thing about Westminster, is that everyone who was on that course, because it was a radio and digital production course, always had a love for radio. Even though they hadn't maybe done it or worked in or had a chance to volunteer it, they all had a love for it. And I think that was the thing that shined through. So you learned so much from different people that maybe hadn't worked in the industry or volunteered in the industry, but they still had that love and that passion and that drive, and they all went on to do great things. And yeah, that was a decision that was really important to me. I remember at the time I was looking at 3 universities. I think one was Bournemouth, one was Portsmouth, and one was London. And I went and seen Bournemouth is a great media university. I went and seen it, but it was too close to home. Like, it was only an hour. Like, I just didn't think it would be the proper uni experience. Portsmouth, I didn't really like. It was too TV based, and I just thought, well, it wasn't for me either. And then I went to Westminster, seen the facilities, obviously knew it'd be in London. My mum and dad were like, I think you need to be in London for what you want to do. And yeah, it was the best decision I could have made to go up there and study up there.
Was almost an element of also networking as well, because London kind of being the kind of main hub for radio and audio in most respects, most of the biggest audio editing houses and the majority of the main radio stations are based out of London. Was that also kind of an intentional decision in that sense, that you knew at the end of the day there was a higher likelihood that you were going to be able to kind of do some work experience in London, or at least rub shoulders with people who potentially can teach you a thing or two? Was that kind of the reason?
Yeah, for sure. I think that was actually probably the main appeal. Was being up there, and being able to, pop into central London, try and get some experience, go to some work experience, make the tea, coffee, whatever it would be. You're never going to get that opportunity in Bournemouth or Portsmouth. You know what I mean? We might do it local radio, but not on the level up there. That there's so much media up there now. But saying that as well, a major pull to Westminster Uni, when I was talking about this the other day, was the student media that they had there. They had student media, which was called Smoke. So they had Smoke TV, Smoke Radio, Smoke Magazine. And that was, so I was part of Smoke Radio, and that was such an important thing. I think even bigger than the course, because it has that connection to the Student Radio Association, which is the overseeing body that everyone submits for the SRA awards and all of that stuff, and have conference. And that was another way not only to get experience, running a radio station basically, but also making so many new friends as well.
I love how you mentioned, obviously, the student radio station. Very much had a similar experience. I went to the New Zealand Broadcasting School, and I will say the radio station there has its own kind of legacy in a sense, because everyone knows the brands that were established through there. But yeah, Smoke Radio became highly awarded during your time there. So what was your philosophy when rebuilding and rebranding the station? Because it's a pretty intense feat to go about rebranding and rebuilding a station from the ground up. How did you find yourself in that scenario? And also, what were kind of the things that were running through your mind during that time? Because it must have been a lot of pressure.
Yeah, we were in, so the second year of university, you can have the option to apply to be on the committee. So, they're looking for a station manager, they're looking for a head of programming, they're looking for digital people, blah, 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 blah. So the previous committee then interview everybody. And I went for station manager, and absolutely did not think I would get it. And I always remember, I didn't think about it at all. And then I had to go to this awards do, and they sat me near the front. I thought, oh, that's funny, sat near the front. And then they announced me, and I thought, oh shit. And then it was me, and it was such a good team that we had, and I was honored to do it. And so we had a lot of ambitions. I remember when we first met, we all had these mad ideas, but the main thing is that we wanted to modernize it. We wanted to make it more youthful, more fresh. So we had a great guy who was looked after our marketing and digital stuff, and he was so good at digital graphics. His name was Gabriel. He was a great guy he always had a vision, could just master Photoshop, master and edit. And he had this really youthful look and sound that he was able to create. And then all of us just chipped in. We had so many big and bold ideas that we wanted to do. And I had some crazy ones as well. I remember one of the, I always said, I was talking about this the other week, was I had the idea, because we had a campus on Regent Street, that we should, and it's very optimistic, we should broadcast the Regent Street Christmas light switch on, the most iconic switch on in the whole of the UK, that we should broadcast. So I went after the event organisers, and a lot of back and forth, to be fair. And bear in mind, they had Clean Bandit performing, Michael Bublé, Paloma Faith, all these big music stars, and we got the rights to broadcast it. We could plug into their mixer and be the only radio station in the whole country to broadcast the Regent Street Christmas light switch on. We were relying on little 3G coverage and tethering so many devices to make it work, but we did it, and oh god, it was good fun. Like, who else would get that opportunity? I don't know how I wanted to wrangle that one, but that was good fun. Like, we had so many big events like that, what we would try and cover, put on our own events, and try and get smoke out in the community. And I think that's why in the end it did so well. And then, we can hand over to another committee who went on to win gold then for best station. So it's really great to see what you can do.
I love that kind of fucking hell. It's almost like an element of you don't ask, you don't get. And I feel like that's kind of been a recurring thing in your career, Rhys, because as I've seen, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it soon, the guests that you've managed to acquire, the kind of opportunities you've managed to get for multiple publications, it's all so impressive. And in that respect as well, when you were kind of running the station itself, do you think the success more came from obviously yourself and the other team members who managed to create a certain culture around the station, more or less, rather than the content itself? Because it seemed like the culture of the whole station changed because you had this whole attitude of we're not a student station, we should act like we are a commercial station that is going up against the same sort of level of network. Is that kind of how you guys looked at it, more or less? Don't sell ourselves short?
Yeah, we were like that. We had quite high standards, I think. Our imaging sounded amazing. But on the other hand, we didn't have as many programs as we probably should have. And that was a shame. And that was probably down to, we weren't... we were encouraging people to get involved, but it's a big commitment for some students to take on doing a show every week. So we had a small amount of shows, but that was still enough. We were still doing enough, and we had a dedicated core team where there'd always be shows on, and the music sounded really good. So I think it's just we all had a vision. We were all on the same board. We all had a good culture. We all got on, and I think that's the thing that is shown through from then to now for me. I think what the most important thing ever within any team that I work in is just having respect for each other. And I think that's where you learn it the most, is something like that, when you're all doing it for free, volunteering, but we all respected each other. And that's when it makes it a successful project.
And I'm guessing also taking those ideas and opinions of other people that are within your team, because as you said, it sounded like there was a lot of people, a lot of collaboration, and it kind of worked together almost like a startup company in a way, which I love, and I love that kind of mentality. And in that respect, obviously, you had the success at Smoke, but then I guess we have to move into your shift into commercial radio. So for you, what was the biggest shock when you transitioned from student community broadcasting, you had to start probably a nice wee run-up, into then going into fully commercial radio? And I think probably this is a great time to kind of especially jump into the fact that you're jumping into the offices of the likes of Calvin McKenzie at Love Sport Radio with myself, or I don't know, I guess the other kind of level of things. How did you find that transition? And for you, what was it like?
So I got offered an opportunity whilst I was in second year of uni through a friend who had started working at Talk Radio, which is part of Murdoch's News UK. It's a kind of speech radio news station in the UK. And I got offered the opportunity to be a tech up on the weekends. And I took that up, and I'd never, I was working with names that I'd watch on morning TV when I was growing up, and now they're presenting the weekend breakfast show that I'm pushing the buttons for. So that was a bit of a thing to get used to, but you got used to it. And yeah, I loved it on a Saturday and Sunday morning doing that. And then that kind of opportunity led to one to another then at Talk. I then went on to become the assistant producer of those shows that I worked on the weekend. And those shows were, they weren't just hard news. We'd do a weekend breakfast show with Penny Smith. And then between 10 and 1, it was a mix of shows. It was a couple from Gogglebox one week. Like they were kind of like light entertainment shows, and they were really fun as well. Like we'd have a laugh and basically just get pissed on air. So it was brilliant. So that was that. And then I can't fully remember, if I'm honest with you, how the Love Sport radio opportunity came up. I feel like I would have applied, and I think it was some sort of producer role or tech op role I applied for. I definitely wasn't ready to fully step up, but I remember, I think you're just thrown at the deep ends there. I remember meeting Steve Hodge at a coffee place. He was the program director at the time. And then he kind of said, "Oh, I think you could produce," or something like that. And then he gave me a Thursday night show with Paul Connolly. Do you remember him, the Irish guy?
Of course I do, mate. Of course I do. Great crack.
I remember doing his show for a bit, and then I feel like university ended then, and then I was put on to Calvin's show, working pretty much for a good few weeks. I did that, and that taught you a lot. Definitely taught you a lot, and but you grew I never had contact before, but you grew contacts. Everyone shared their contacts, and then you're just winging it. You're tech hopping, producing a show, and going with the flow. Basically, yeah, it's swim or sink, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's what I loved about you when I saw you work in the offices, is I think a lot of other people that come straight out of uni have this kind of like a Bambi eye look where they're like, I'm not sure what I should be doing. Where I felt like you kind of like, you know what, I have no idea. Well, not that you didn't have any idea what you're doing. You knew exactly what you were doing. But I feel like, but you had this kind of like confidence in yourself that I really loved. And I appreciated that when I was working with you, and the few times that we ended up speaking, that I was just like, gotta give this guy credit. He's just doesn't give a shit. He's just going to give it a go and see what happens. And I think that's literally the kind of, I don't know, I think that's maybe why you're fitting into Australian culture probably quite well, because that's kind of the attitude there as well. Do you feel like that's kind of like something that stood with you?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think the thing about Love Sport, it was such a fresh startup. There was no rule book or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? So, all we do is we had to hit the ads at a certain time and don't swear, basically. And that was that. So yeah, we just totally went with the flow, made up the formats, found our own guests. And I always remember as well, do you remember Patrick Christie's?
Of course.
So Patrick Christie's now one of the star presenters on GB News. I remember giving him his first chance on radio to come and do a paper review. And I was speaking to him a few months ago, and he said, "Rhys, I've never forgot you gave me my first job in the industry." I said, "Jesus Christ, that really Love Sport." He said, "No, you did."
You're actually right, mate. And I was one of the people that, because Steve came to me and said, "What do you think of that Patrick guy?" And I was like, "I think you should get him back, mate, because Calvin seems to like him." He's like, "I don't know, mate." And I was like, "No, you should. It would be interesting." So that's so funny that you mentioned that. I never realized that Patrick came from you, and it makes so much sense. It makes a hell of a lot of sense, mate, because you would have found him when he was working at that political website, right?
Yeah, and was he at the Express or something like that? I can't remember anyway, but yeah, something like that. I think he done a few media, but I got him on Love Sport most weeks, and then before you know it, he was co-presenting on mornings with Calvin.
That's so wild, mate. You are responsible for probably one of the most well-known faces in media at this point, especially in the UK. I love it.
The Beyond Broadcast Podcast.
One thing I kind of want to touch on as well is you've worked across like multiple formats. You've done speech radio, you've done documentaries, a bit of current affairs, as you said, some light entertainment stuff. Was there a bit of intention even in that? Because it seems like you tried not to get yourself boxed in. Was that kind of a move that you tried to have? Or it just kind of happened as it happened because you happened to just be put onto different formats that kind of just seemed to work with you?
I think a mixture of both. I think I've always been, since probably I've left university now, and there's been a couple of projects, but nothing that stands out. I think I've always been in this kind of news, current affairs, kind of documentary style is kind of the thing that I can do now, and that's what I feel confident in. But that's not to say do other bits and bobs as well, like Glastonbury and things like that. So but I am always open to doing other formats and things like that, because it's a different light, it's a different pace of work, it's something different, and I'm always willing to do that. So I think always keep your options open. I've always been very mindful of that.
And I love the fact that you got given some pretty impressive opportunities pretty early on in your career as well. And when I'm talking about career, even at university, because you ended up producing a documentary around the Grenfell, obviously, situation that occurred. How was it that you end up approaching people that have obviously been through some pretty traumatizing things, but do it in a way that it's sensitive to the candor, but still getting the messaging and the story that you're trying to get across? I know that's probably
Yeah,
quite an intense one to hit, but yeah, I was
no, no,
always
no.
curious about that.
I always talk about that project because I'm so proud of it. It was actually, it's a bit of a complicated one, but I was offered in university in our third year. We had to make a documentary, and Grenfell was so close to me. I'd drive past it every day and see it. I remember driving past and seeing it burning, and it always stood out to me. And I'd always be part of the Facebook groups of the injustice and everything they face. And I remember saying to one of my lecturers, "Oh, I think I want to make something on Grenfell." Yeah. I don't know, Rich. I don't think there's I think everything's been done. And I thought, oh well. So I didn't really do much more. And then at the same time, I was kind of talking to a production company that I'd done a little bit of some work with, and I said, I really want to make something on Grenfell. Like I really can feel like I can make something. And the kind of mood was that everything had been done that could have been done on Grenfell. Everyone knows what happened that terrible night. What more is there to say? But I'd gotten into the Facebook groups. I'd been speaking to some of the survivors there, some of the residents, and there was this feeling that they were, well, it wasn't a feeling, sorry. They were all still having the injustice. They were all still living in Premier Inn hotels. They were all still had permanent housing. There was all these other stories that they were just not being heard and told to the public. And so I just went and on my own made it and thought, nah, I'm just going to do it and just see what I can gather. So that's what I did. And spoke to a few residents and then went away and made something and then gave it to this production company. And they said, you proved us wrong. This is really good. So I was happy to prove them wrong. And that documentary is so special to me because now on the anniversary, it tends to go out on Radio 4. And it did for the first few years, and it's still on iPlayer now. And the residents were so pleased with it. And I think it was all about pushing for some sort of awareness, change, and it's an honor for them to trust little old me to tell their story without, any backing up anyone at the time.
Because I can imagine, in one respect, it's obviously about getting an interesting story, but in the second respect, as you said, a lot of the residents came to you afterwards and were like, Rhys, thank you for telling our story and at least building some awareness. Is it kind of interesting in that sense, though, because you almost have a responsibility as a producer to kind of make sure that you're delivering the story on both ends of interest and also dealing with this pretty complex issue. In that respect, was it nice for you to kind of say no to the naysayers and be like, there is more to the story than just the immediate event that just happened?
Yeah, I think follow your heart. And that's something that I learned from that. I followed my heart and I thought, nah, I know there's something in this. And also I felt like a connection to them. And I thought, even if it doesn't go anywhere, I'm not going to let them down. I want to tell their story. I want to do something for them. So let's just do it. And that was that. And then it developed. Then I went away, edited it, and then got the green light to go and make it. And then I got the green light afterwards then to tidy it up and make it into this 12-15 minute documentary, whatever it was. And I always remember the week before I had to deliver it, my hard drive corrupted and I lost the whole lot. The whole thing went and I was having a breakdown. Anyway, managed to get most of it back, but lost the whole session. So I had to start all over again, basically. But it actually made it better. It made it so much better. I had new fresh ears on it. It was a stressful time, but really rewarding project and an honor for them to trust me to tell their story.
I'm curious in that sense, why do you think it was the fresh ears that kind of set it apart? Was it an element of you felt like you trimmed the fat and you kind of went straight to the story, or you felt like the pacing kind of changed in that respect?
Yeah, I feel like my vision had changed a little bit on it and the pacing of it and the sound of it had changed, I thought. And I think it sounded so much better, basically, with a fresh pair of ears, fresh look over the transcript all again. So I did feel like in hindsight now, not at the time, but it was a good thing that could have happened.
Because I'm curious about that, because this is you kind of learning on the fly as well, how to do storytelling and how to add pace. What was kind of your original thought behind the rhythm of it? Were you just there does need to be some sort of cadence to it? Or it was literally you were taking the most interesting parts and trying to build a story around it. How was that kind of first, like, kind of foray into building like an audio documentary? Like, what was
I
it like
think,
for
yeah,
you?
and that was definitely my first one. So I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, but I had consumed, and I think this teaches you a lot in life. I'd consumed so many documentaries and so many, all these audio dramas, and watched so many TV documentaries on, terrorist attacks, all of this stuff. I'd consumed so much, so I kind of had a vision in my head of, okay, I know what they do, blah 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 blah. And then it kind of grew from there. And then, I feel like there's different parts of a documentary. You have the part where you retell what happened that night. You have to do that, and you're just setting these scenes along the way, to be able to say it. And I had the guidance, I had the production company in that could guide me and help me as well. So that was really helpful. And yeah, I think that definitely what it comes down to is consuming as much content as possible and thinking, all right, how can I do this a little bit differently to everybody else?
Yeah, inspiration and passion. So the passion to
Mm.
obviously create in the first place, and the inspiration to kind of give you the backing and the kind of like establishing the examples that you can use later down the track.
Yeah.
I love it, man. And moving into, obviously, you mentioned the fact that Radio 1 was a big kicker for you, that you always wanted to kind of be on Radio 1, or that would be the eventual. So how was it for you? Because you eventually ended up covering a session for Radio 1 at one point, presenting there as well. Was it a bit surreal for
Yeah.
you being able to jump behind the mic at Radio 1 and be like, oh, okay, like I'm here now, like,
Yeah,
what now?
that was a bucket list moment, and it's something that I never thought you'd get the opportunity to do, and it was just absolutely brilliant. But that came through the Student Radio Association. Smoke had run gold that year, and a few people. I think there was me. There was 5 of us from Smoke Radio that could have the opportunity to present over the Christmas period on Radio 1 to cover for their hosts. And me and a girl called Holly Jones that I not Holly Jones, Holly Palmer, that I co-presented with. Who you'd know Holly Palmer, obviously, from
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Love Sport. A great person who's now really high up at the BBC doing directing there for some of their radio content. She's a great producer and great tech op, and a great person. So me and her had the opportunity to do Radio 1 together, and it was brilliant. We had such a laugh doing it. We had to keep it under wraps for so long, and it was killing us. We couldn't tell a soul. So that day in December, we could finally tell people was amazing. But like, you look at those pictures of us behind the Radio 1 mic, and we were testing out New Year's Eve outfits for Weymouth, because in Weymouth it's a big deal to go as fancy dress. So we had all these inflatable costumes on. We did a kind of innuendo-based pantomime on the radio. We rang our nans, and they did like a nan off. They had a row about if they knew who knew their grandchildren better. We did all these mad things, but it was so fun, and we loved it. And like, you could take that off for life now. I'd be happy if I never did another gig in radio again. Like, you've done that. That was the top for me. And I have that show on my phone, and I listen to it every now and again. It's a good laugh, and we had such a good fun. And to be in those studios, learning that, having a team of producers there at Radio 1 as well, looking after us, like, it was a real honour.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that would have felt like, mate, knowing that you're speaking to the whole nation. It must have been a mix of, for me, I would be terrified, but I'm guessing for you guys, you're just riding the high of, like, obviously having that opportunity. Would that be a good good assumption?
It was. And we'd done about 2. We'd been in there for training and things like that, but we'd done 2 kind of dress rehearsals, and they always don't go to plan and things like that. And then we did the actual one. And a little spoiler, that show was never live. We never did it live. We pre-recorded
Seriously?
the whole thing. Yeah,
It was all pre-rec.
It was all pre-rec.
Mate,
But you would never know.
Even I fall to the illusion of pre-recorded, mate. Like, bloody hell, that's impressive, man. And I think that's always, I guess for your sake, it probably was a good thing. But in the same respect, you know, riding on the seat of your pants, it would have been a good thing anyway. And
well, we say it was pre-recorded, but we had to record it as live. We couldn't.
Yeah.
They still didn't want us to make any mistakes or anything like that, and we didn't. I don't think pretty much any edits went into it afterwards. But it's it was definitely a great opportunity. It was funny. Holly said to me a few years ago, she said, "Oh, there was this guy in the office today at the BBC, and he said, 'Are you the girl that did the pantomime on Radio 1?'" And see, people still remember her like that. I think it was so funny.
that's incredible that you can still have that impact even like many years later. And
Yeah.
And in that respect, I think an interesting place to go to now is the fact that you helped launch a primetime nightly show at GB News. Now, GB News came out of like almost nowhere in that sense. And from that respect, I've heard from many people that ended up working in the GB News offices that it was almost in its same respect a little bit like we're struggling, well, not struggling to get to air, but it was very much like everyone was like riding on the fact like everything had to go right. And as anything goes, usually there's some like hiccups along the way. So what was it like for you launching like one of these new programs? It must have been pretty like stressful in that sense, or in some respects, was there a kind of like dress rehearsal phase, much like you had with Radio 1?
Yeah, so I had been at Talk Radio for 3 years, and I'd been working at the Telegraph as well, doing some podcasts there. And a few people had started to leave Talk Radio now I get my years wrong on this, but I feel like it was 2021. Yeah, 2021 startup. People started to leave to go to GB News, and they were being poached. And I thought, well, no one's poaching little old me. So I was happy where I was. And I'd never done TV before, so I didn't have any TV experience. And I was just happy at Talk Radio and opportunities were there. And then one day I got a call from someone at GB News being like, oh, we've heard some things about you from some of your colleagues. Can we have a chat? And then we had a chat, and then they offered me a job as a senior producer at GB News. Going straight in at a senior level was unheard of, and going into TV with no real experience really. But this was the kind of thing that GB News were trying to create, and I can totally understand it. They wanted to hire producers with all backgrounds, some political advisors, some radio producers, some TV producers. They wanted this kind of mix of people to kind of put these shows together to come with all these opinions and ideas, and it actually worked. So left Talk Radio, went to GB News, and for the first few weeks, we were just all on Zoom planning. We didn't even know when we started there what show we'd be on or anything like that. We didn't have a clue. And then into a few weeks in there, we found out what show we were going to be on. And then at the time I was put on Weekend Prime. So the show that went on air between 9 and midnight, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So shit for your social life. But anyway, so I did that. Was on that show for about 3 weeks, and then, launched that and was on that show for 3 weeks, then moved on to our actual big primetime show in the evening, which was Dan Wharton Tonight, fellow Kiwi, which was between 9 and 11, Monday to Thursday. And I'd worked with Dan before at Talk Radio, and we got on really well. So I was really pleased to go and work on his show, and he was fighting for that. So I was really happy with that. But going back to the launch of GB News, so we were on Zoom for a while, and then we all could move to London, because I was working from home at the time then, and then went back to London. And then we were actually based in a Hilton hotel in a ballroom there, learning all this software on laptops, probably about 60 of us in there, learning away how to cut, how to do your rundowns, all of this stuff. And then they dressed up like a little hotel room, which was like a mock-up TV studio where presenters could pretend to use the auto cue and things like that. And then whilst this is all going on, the studios are being built in Paddington, so we were getting to go down every week and have a look at them, and they were just coming together very, very quickly. And then all of a sudden the launch date was announced, and I don't think it's any mistake to say, and I think it's been openly said out there, that we weren't ready. But when is there a right time to launch a TV channel? I'm not sure, because I don't think you're ever going to be 100% ready. And it was a roller coaster of a launch. And I think, it definitely had its ups and downs. I think there was a reason why there hadn't been another TV news daily channel launching in the UK in, I think, over 20 years, because it's a lot of bloody work. And especially when GB News are trying to use brand new systems, brand new technology, things are going to go wrong. And they did, and no end of memes and tweets about things like that. And I remember there's been this Twitter account that was set up at the time, GB News Fails, and there's someone, I don't know who it was, but was clipping up things that were going wrong during our launch, basically, and put them over Twitter, and they'd just go viral. And I remember every night after I finished work and we'd do a show, little things maybe would go wrong, and the first thing I'd do in the taxi on the way home is check GB News Fails and made sure that I hadn't made it. And that was kind of like, oh, thank God we had a good show then. But those first few weeks, that's what it was like. But anyway, that settled. GB News learned what it was. It hired more people. It got better technology. And, I know people have mixed opinions on it now, but look at it now, consistently beating BBC and Sky News for the last 10 months.
It's mad to think of, and like you said, the fact that there hadn't been another news launch in 20 years of in any respect for any channel is insane. And I love the fact that you were checking in the taxi for fails. Did you end up catching any yourself? Like, did you end up being in the crosshairs, or no? You managed to avoid it.
I managed to avoid it. That was the kind of benchmark for me at those first 2 weeks. Oh, we've had a good show, we didn't make it, but oh my god, it was stressful. Yeah, we'd be building the show as we would be on air. Yeah, it was hard. Learned a lot, and I think the thing that got us through it was the team. There was such a great bunch of people. We're all quite young. We were all so keen, working with like big names as well that GB News had hired. Like they hadn't backed down on hiring the biggest names in the industry at the time. And yeah, we'd have a laugh. We'd have such a laugh. But my God, there'd be moments when you'd be crying in that office. I'm not going to lie to you.
And that's kind of one thing I really wanted to touch on, because the live news environment is completely different from radio. At least with radio, you can kind of cover things up a little bit more. With news, especially television, it's all out there to bear. Was there kind of like a coping mechanism you kind of had to kind of remain chill and calm and cool? Because obviously that's the main way to kind of get through those situations instead of panicking. Or, much like what you said, were there moments maybe mid on air that you were kind of like, oh God, like this is a disaster? Or did you manage to kind of maintain your cool until afterwards?
Do you know what? It's really difficult, because I think you go through things in life, personal and career-wise, and I went through a bit of a shit time when at GB News. Personally, my dad had passed away, and he hadn't been very well during the launch, and then he'd passed away later that year. So I think I learned that no matter what, this is only a TV show. No one is going to die, and I think that's the most important thing. It's not. We're just putting a TV show together every night. We're not doing heart surgery. And I think when you start thinking like that, and that doesn't take away that you don't care about it at all, but what's the point getting so high, getting so upset when, it's just a TV show at the end of the day, guys. That's what you have to remember here. We're all doing our absolute best.
100%. And there's going to be another one tomorrow. I think, and I completely understand that. And I think that's a really good mentality to have, and I agree with you. I think others would probably see that as being like, not expecting quality, but I think it's the exact opposite. It's just being able to kind of remain level-headed and know, like, there's going to be better next time, or there's always improvements that can be made.
This podcast is powered by WIZZFX. We make brands sound sick. Music, radio, podcasts, sonic branding. If your audio needs to hit harder and stick longer, WIZZFX has you covered. Learn more at WIZZFX.com.
Mate, like, the thing that's always impressed me about you, and I touched on it earlier, is the fact that you always seem to secure incredibly good guests, incredible interviews. You've had things set up like Caitlyn Jenner, Shamima Begum, Matt Hancock. Like, what separates a producer that is able to get like guests like that and one who obviously just doesn't? What do you think is the main thing that separates yourself from maybe other producers who maybe can't get those guests?
I think, like when I was at Talk Radio, I always I did a show on the weekends there, and it was just a Saturday afternoon show, 1 to 4. Never not really a prime slot or anything like that. But so I was a presenter at the time, a comedian called Bob, and he was such a good guy. He has so many links to the industry, and we really wanted this show to be incredible. So I wouldn't back down on putting out big bids or anything like that. And we got some massive names to come in on a Saturday afternoon, doing their conversations and things like that. And so I think that's where that spark came from, is that I've always been quite ambitious in my guest getting and things like that. And so when I was at GB News, they kind of separate the teams into input and output. The input team would be gathering guests, and the output team would then be in the gallery. So I started off as in output, and I was doing that for about probably about a year. Then I took some time off, and then I came back and I moved into an input role, and on Dan's show in the evening on prime time. And there's a big show. We had a budget, we had big plans, we had a big audience at the time, so we wanted to go for the biggest names. And then that's something that I never backed down about. I shared my job with a girl called Lucy, who is the most incredible guest booker and producer as well, and me and her would just bounce off each other and come up with these ideas and things like that, and she secured so many exclusives. But I think the one that there's a couple of them I'm really proud of there, but one of the ones I'm most proud of is probably the Matt Hancock one, the former health secretary, who in all eyes shouldn't have done the interview on GB News. he shouldn't have done it, because we had been, sorry, not we, but the presenter at the time had been so anti-lockdown, anti-COVID, and Matt Hancock was health secretary at the time when all of this was going on. And we launched this kind of lockdown inquiry. So we were inviting all these guests on to talk about lockdown, the effects, blah, 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 blah. And I wanted to go under the guy that was making the rules and get him to come on air. And, you know, his advisors, all of his team would have seen Dan outrightly speaking against what Matt Hancock was doing at the time. So those conversations with Matt Hancock's team were going on for I think I had about 7 months, me going back and forth with them, meeting them for coffee, Zooms, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then we finally agreed on a date. And that morning he actually tried to pull out as well. He would had to be in Parliament, but we had to run this big promo campaign that he was going to be on, and it was advertised all week. So we'd sent cameras down to Westminster to get him to do it, even if it was from outside Westminster. In the end, then he managed to make it work somehow, and we got him in a car, did the interview, and by all accounts, really proud of getting that interview. That was quite a big coup for us. But so many, and I think for me as well, it's not about, you know, the big celebrities or the big stars or the big MPs. It's actually about the real people, and the people that have gone through some real life experiences and have these, you know, stories to tell that no one else can relate to because they're so traumatic or anything like that. They're the ones that shine out mostly to me as well.
Because you've managed to find a narrative and find a story within maybe the person that is just the everyday person. And I love that kind of mentality as well. And I appreciate the fact that you kind of touched on the fact that, like, this wasn't like a case of you just instantly getting the contact straight away. There was months and months of work that was required for you to even warm up his, like, kind of, I guess, PR team to even consider it. And in that respect as well, you did mention that he almost pulled out. Have you ever had a guest pull out very, very last minute, and that's been like a struggle to kind of like end up pulling someone else in instead? And what was probably the ultimate save that you've had from having one guest booked to kind of cover maybe a 20-minute slot to then finding a replacement within that same kind of like 5-10 minute window?
All the time. I tell you the worst one. I won't name the name of the celebrity, but I was working at Talk Radio at the time on that Saturday afternoon show that I just talked about. So for the first hour, we kind of have a panel in there of other comedians, and they do these like, have I got news for you style in the first hour, where they go through some of the stories of the week and they like have a laugh. But then the second hour was a full hour with one celebrity, kind of an in conversation format. So you'd rely on the celebrity being there on time and in the studio. And this person on this day was on time and was very early, and is a very high profiled name in the UK. And she arrived at around 1:20, and I think she'd be on air at 2. So I get a phone call from reception being like, your guest is here. I said, okay, I'll send down the assistant producer to come and get the person. So assistant producer goes down, and then it gets to about 1:40. I thought, well, that's funny. The AP isn't back. Anyway, carried on. Tried to ring them and it went to voicemail. I thought, don't know where they are. So it got to 1:45 and I rang them again. No answer. And then I rang down to reception. I said, have the assistant producer and the guests come up? Yeah. They should be on the way. Maybe in the canteen. I thought, oh, that's strange. So I had to walk around the canteen. Weren't in there. I thought, this is weird. 1:55 then, they're on air in 5 minutes. I have nothing to go from 2 till 3 o'clock. Absolutely nothing. I think, where the hell can they be? And we were working in a massive building at the time, 17 floors. And I rang the reception and I said, they're still not here. I said, by any chance, is there a lift stuck in this building? And she said, oh yeah, we are dealing with 2 people stuck in a lift at the moment. I said, no way, this cannot be happening. Anyway, you have time to then think, oh my God, there's a really high profile name stuck in a lift with a producer. Put the phone down, try and fill this hour quickly on air. And I remember saying to the presenter in his ear as he was on air, you're going to have to keep filling. The name of the guest is stuck in our lift, and his eyes just dropped like that. So we made it work, and he was just like, go and deal with that. We'll fill this hour. I'll keep these comedians on. Just go and deal with that situation. anyway, deal with that situation. She was amazing about it. Like, I didn't expect, she was stuck in there for over an hour. And I remember when the lift opened, she was sat on the floor, and it was awful to see. And I felt like the worst person in the world, but she was so understanding and so nice about it. And I was actually gutted as well, because she was quite a big name that I've been going after for ages to have her on, and she got stuck in a bloody lift.
You know what's funny is you're the second producer that I've worked with that's had the exact same scenario of being stuck in a lift, because this happened at Love Sport for a very well-known UK musician was stuck in the lift, and the firefighters had to go get him out. And yeah, so you know this one, and I think he missed the whole 3-hour show.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, that was a goodie.
He's a big guy.
One. Yeah, he's a big guy. He's a big guy and a big musician. So yeah, that was a good 3-hour ordeal.
I forgot about that.
And that was during the World Cup, because he was meant to be a commentator during. Yeah, perfect. I love it. But it's still the story that sticks in my mind like no tomorrow. And I think one of the other things that must be interesting is because you work in opinion-led TV, or we're working in opinion-led TV. Does that kind of personally change your opinions on things? And also, how do you navigate also working with maybe personalities that are like obviously very intense? Is there like a way or a manner that you like work with them, or is it kind of like a thing of like you treat everyone the exact same? There's no changing your personality, no changing your mode of work.
No, I think that's what like I will always do as a producer, is that I'm not going to change my personality or my feeling that, you know, we have to stick by the rules no matter what, no matter where you are in the world. And, you know, obviously in the UK, we're dominated by Ofcom and the restrictions that we have around that with broadcasting. And so you always have to understand that. And I think it's having that relationship with a presenter that, okay, yeah, you can have your opinions. That's absolutely fine. I think that's really important in this day and age to be able to say your opinions, but there's going to be this opposing view. And that's going to happen. And presenters in the UK understand that. And, you know, we're never just going to have one side of the argument in anything. And actually, when I was at GB News, we had one night, on the first night I was in the gallery that night, we had the most, I think it was, you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong, the most complained about show, or the second most complained about show that year for Ofcom. But we were found not guilty because we had balance in opinion. And that's down to presenter understanding the need to have that. That's down to the team understanding that. And that's happened along the way as well. When I was working at Talk TV, I worked on the former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries show, and her first night was an interview with Boris Johnson, and I was a producer on that. And I made sure that we had differing opinions. It was obviously Nadine's going to be pro-Boris. So we had a panel that evening that was a former Labour advisor, political commentator, blah, blah, blah. That again went under investigation by Ofcom for that show. And we were found not guilty, but because having that panel. So I think it's understanding the need for balance, and the need of that, and that is something that you won't lose. You can have all the personalities the same, but it needs to be fair and accurate.
I love that. And I think one of the other interesting things I'd like to touch on as well is the fact that, strong on-air talent sometimes can be maybe challenging at times. Or have you never felt that? Because I imagine, and this is from maybe my own personal opinion, that some of the GB News kind of presenters, I come across incredibly strong opinions and maybe like really want to say something. Is it kind of like hard to produce maybe certain talents, or do you find like there's always a balance you can find with people? Like there's never a situation of someone being too hard or too easy to work with?
I think that's the thing about talent. You never know necessarily what you're going to get, but I think it's about down to respect and understanding them and them understanding you. And, you know, I think it's fair to say you're not going to work with every single talent that you're not going to get on, with every talent you're going to work with. And that's absolutely natural. And that's normal, because who gets on with everyone that they meet, and especially in a workplace, and especially with high profile names, that's never going to happen. But I think learning about talent personalities, talent expectations can set you along a path to be able to cope with whoever walks in your path within TV or radio.
And in respect to your constantly changing career, it's probably worth dipping into the fact that you've done quite a bit of work over multiple Glastonbury festivals. And what's unique about this is the fact that you're producing media inside the live environment, in terms of like, when I say live environment, it's out of the studio essentially. So what was it like for you being able to kind of like get your teeth into that, and how much planning goes into working in festival media? And is it a case of surviving as well? Because I can imagine that must be quite an intense kind of environment that you're putting yourself into.
Yeah, so I love working at Glastonbury. It's the highlight on my year. Gutted that it's not on this year, but I did. So for the first 2 or 3 years, when I was at Glastonbury, they set up their own pop-up radio station. So it's a radio station called WIZZFX that broadcasts around the festival, and obviously on FM then to the surrounding areas. So I presented breakfast there the first year, then I did the evening show, then I did breakfast again another year, and alongside that as well, I was also looking after their social media as well. And then I did that, and that was amazing. And then I had the opportunity to go and actually work for the festival themselves and do social media for them. So I've done that for the last 3 years, which has been absolutely brilliant to be able to work with the team there. And it's a small team, but they're so great, so committed, so fun as well. And it's such like a cool, fun gig to do. And it's kind of like a little oasis in a way to get away and do something completely different for a little bit. And I absolutely love it. So yeah, but go back to what you said, that's another live environment again. You're dealing with lot could happen around the festival, lots of things to cover, lots of stages, lots of artists, things like that, but a really streamlined team who know what they're doing and know what to produce.
And is there some elements from your, like, obviously other parts of your career that you ended up taking into Glastonbury and saw success in? Because I imagine, like, taking the elements from live radio, television as well, when, like, maybe the idea of, like, cutting up clips for social media, among other things, there's probably quite a bit that you've learned over the years that you've been able to take to Glastonbury.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the major thing for me is probably the kind of social media experience. When I was doing the radio station social media, I had a kind of new vision, and we rebranded the website. And I think that's that thing from Smoke Radio, looking at how we can shake up the look and sound of things as well. So I had all these ideas for that, and then you kind of develop how to speak to a festival audience on social media and things like that. So there's skills that you pick up along the way of how to connect with different audiences and things like that. So I think the major thing was definitely taking those social skills and adapting them in a very different way.
And I guess, in a complete aside, what's been your favourite moment of working Glastonbury? Because obviously it's the festival that everyone wants to go to. What's been one of your standout moments out of the festivals that you've worked at?
There's been no end. Like when we did the radio station, like the people that we would meet, the people we get to interview. I remember once meeting Chris Martin from Coldplay and having a chat with him. He was a really nice guy. I remember the first time like being taken onto one of the main stages to have a tour of it as well. Like before the festival opens, we are on site. So, and it's empty, there's crew everywhere being able to working on all the stages. So getting to see it as it's being built and seeing it before everyone arrives is amazing. Going up to the sign, seeing it, being backstage at the pyramid stage, it's like you pinch yourself moments. Like I never take it for granted. Like it's so lucky to be a part of the biggest festival in the world. Like honestly, I'm blessed to have been able to do it, and hopefully can continue to.
Does it really give you a sense of place as well, being able to see what the artist is kind of seeing before they end up taking the stage? Does it kind of give you like an element of understanding the gravitas of like how many people are there and like what they're kind of doing on the daily?
Yeah, for sure. And you walk past them backstage and things like that, and you see the levels of production that are put into their shows. Like it's a real like eye-opening moment, and it's an amazing place. It's an amazing place to go, even if you're working or just as a punter. Like I'd say it's definitely like you've got to tick it off in your life.
100%. And you ticked off another thing in your life. As you said, you were going to move over to Australia quite early on in your career, but then your decision ended up coming a little bit later on, which for all intents and purposes was probably the better decision. Like you said, you matured a lot. Was it difficult kind of leaving? Because you did say the fear that kind of initially existed was, I'm going to lose my connections. I'm going to lose my like kind of network that I've established in the UK. Was there a little bit of fear attached to the move that you made recently? Was there kind of that thought, or no? You were kind of like, what? If I never do it, I'm not going to. I need to do it now.
It was kind of that as well. It was that. It was kind of, there was never a good time to go. I never knew what to expect when I got here. And I think I'd been emailing like media companies in Australia before I got here for a little bit, and not having much luck, if I'm honest. And I just thought, I just need to risk it. I knew I wanted to do a bit of traveling. So I went traveling across Australia for 3 months and then came back, had a couple of meetings with different people, and then went into the ABC here, and went to Radio Sydney, did a trial shift there. Liked it, and then went back again, and they were like, do you want a 3-month contract? And I was like, yeah. And then that was that, Monday to Friday, working on the nightlife show there, as like booking the guests and things like that. I had no idea about Australian guests or anything like that, but you just pick it up along the way. Google's your best friend in those situations. And learning those systems. And then I moved on to the drive time show there, producing that in the gallery again, which I loved because at Radio Sydney and within local radio in Australia, still the producer tech ops. They don't have designated tech ops out here. So there's two of you in there doing that. And I love doing that again, like getting behind and being the nuts and bolts and doing that, which was great fun. But yeah, so it was kind of like, if I don't do this now, I'll never do it. And then obviously the opportunity came at News Corp to go there. So it all kind of fell into place, if I'm honest. And I don't know when it's going to end. But it's been the best thing that I've ever done, definitely.
We'll be right back in just a moment. The Beyond Broadcast Podcast.
And what do you think has been like the biggest kind of curveball that's been thrown at you from the perspective of changing from UK media to Australian media? Is it kind of a case of big fish in a small pond, or do you more feel like it's actually a case of things are a lot more casual than you would expect maybe in Australia compared to the UK?
I think it's different. It's so surprising as well, especially being at News Corp now that there's so many British people that work there. Like sometimes you walk around the office and you don't hear one Aussie. So that in that regard, you sometimes don't know where you are. But well, definitely when I was at the ABC, I feel like I think as a producer in the UK, maybe you can be given 50,000 stories to do that day, whereas here you wouldn't have that many to look after, which is actually a blessing because you can get them perfect and make them right, which is great. And also they're so much more laid back. And I know that some people always say Aussies are laid back, but they actually are. And it's just a happy work environment that you can kind of take it all in.
And in that respect as well, did moving countries kind of force yourself to like reinvent how you work? Because maybe you were used to the kind of like balls to the wall UK style of things of like high stress, high intensity all the time. Did you feel like you changed a little bit since you've been in Australia and maybe it's given you kind of a different view in how you work?
Yeah, I think so. I think I used to stress a lot about things a lot more in the UK, like making sure I had this cat or making sure I had that crab or making sure I had this, the best, blah, 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 blah. Whereas here, I still have those expectations and you still want to do it, but you don't need to stress about it because you'll do it and you have support as well. So I think you just change your mindset a little bit. You don't lower your quality. You just learn to, take it in your stride a bit more.
And I want to touch on, obviously, I'm a huge fan of true crime podcasts. I'd actually listened to Dear Rachelle well before I ended up reaching out to you to have a chat, Rhys, and I think it's kind of like amazing that I ended up hearing your name as associate producer on the podcast, and I was like, I know that guy. Awesome.
Yeah.
We got to have a chat at some point. So, Dear Rachelle, major success. Awesome that you guys got to put together something that's probably going to be talked about for a very long time. Did you kind of know early on in the series that it had that level of potential and that level of reach? Because it extended even to the UK. Most would have thought, it will just stay within Australia. Did you see it getting that big?
Yeah, no, I never saw it. We never saw it getting as big as it did. So I went to News Corp Australia maybe in June or May or July, of 2024. And then maybe 6 or 7 weeks after that, a presenter called Ashley Hanson, who's the host of Dear Rachelle, she'd been investigating Rachelle Charles's murder on her own as a freelance journalist for about a year before coming to News Corp with an idea and a pitch and some recordings. And then she pitched to News Corp and News Corp snapped it up straight away. And then that's when myself was brought on board as a supervising producer, and a woman called Rachel Fountain, who was the executive producer, my boss, a great producer. So it was me, Rachel and Ashley kind of putting this podcast together along with our overall executive editor as well. And yeah, it was definitely something very different. I'd never worked on a true crime thing like this before, a live investigation into her death, and the reach and the impact that it had across all states in Australia, with the whole breadth of News Corp to be able to back it and give it the marketing and give it the push. It was just a career-defining moment for sure.
And for you, because I think this must be the thing that probably a lot of people ask themselves, and I certainly know from my own experience of like trying to find new content, how was it that you end up standing out in an area which for most parts can be quite saturated? There's a million, well, probably not a million, that's probably an over-exaggeration, but there's a lot of true crime podcasts. How was it that you're able to stand out in that respect, and what do you think was the reason that Dear Rachelle really did make an impact in the market?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one thing comes down to the host, Ashley Hansen. She is so driven, so creative, so attached, so determined in her journalism. And I think good old fashioned journalism can go a very long way. That is human led, can go a long way to creating something that's so impactful. I think secondly as well, this was an horrific murder that shocked Australia and didn't get the coverage that it should have necessarily at the time, and had been forgotten for 20 plus years. So we were shining a light on that. Rachelle was a 23-year-old girl who didn't deserve what happened to her family, or salt of the earth Australians. And thirdly as well, it had such the story behind what some of the key persons of interest within the podcast that we were able to speak to, that we were able to hone in on, help to elevate the story as well. So, and I think we didn't know, and I'll speak on behalf of Ashley here, that we didn't know what we were going to get. She didn't know what she was going to find, and one thing unraveled to another and another and another. By the end of episode 13, to have the key person of interest daughter coming out and saying, "I think my father killed Rachelle," you couldn't make that up. And we didn't predict that was ever going to happen. That was never in the pipeline. But as we started publishing, people came forward with what happened, what they heard happened, new witnesses, the key person of interest, ex-wife came forward, all these people came forward. So we started off with 8 episodes being commissioned, and we were ready for about 6, and then it just grew into 15.
I think that was the incredible thing that I found during that journey, is it felt like you guys were almost going episode to episode. It felt like you were going to cut off at any point, and every time you would hear an update, you're like, man, this is really like gathering a lot of steam, and I love that kind of narrative as well. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about the podcast itself is I felt like you humanized a lot of people that were essentially characters in the whole story. Especially, I remember there was one anecdote which was talking about the Rebels bikie gang that continuously got mentioned, and then like the weird kind of aspect of like how their kindness and how their display of being open and honest with the police made a huge difference as to how the investigation turned out later, which I think is incredible. One thing I'd love to go into as well is, how do you avoid the kind of sensationalist kind of attachment that may come from a podcast that's about a victim, a murder victim, and true crime? Because there's obviously been podcasts I've listened to before where it kind of leans too much into the dark, the dingy, and everything else. Why do you think Dear Rachelle really had more of an emotive feel, and in that respect as well, actually seemed more respectful throughout the whole kind of run of the episodes?
I think that's down to a few things. I think I'll say again, it's down to Ashley. Her respect and connection that she had to the family was really important. She'd grown that trust with them. Initially being in touch with them as a freelance journalist, she had a trust and a relationship with them, which we respected. And we're never going to, over centralize. Yes, we're going to add drama to things. Yes, we're going to add suspense to be able to tell what happened to Rachelle, but also take into an account, and that's something that we always took into account, myself, Rachel, Ashley, is, this isn't a story. This is someone's real life. This has happened to real people. So we'll be respectful of that. And we've also wanted to make sure that the audience could connect to Rachelle, could connect to Rachelle's sister. So we were really hell-bent on giving them time and letting the audience love them, love the characters in this series, because there are people that are speaking and breaking their silence when they don't need to, but they want justice, and we respected that. And it just shows what can happen when you build trust and build a relationship with people that have difficult stories to tell, the impact of it, and giving them time and space to tell those stories.
And Because I feel like it must have had a huge impact in kind of what was happening now with you and kind of your career going forward because of how well it's done.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like Dear Rachelle was it was a big piece of work. Like it was the biggest thing I've ever worked on by a track record, and that it was a long time in production. So I think we were in production from July to March, solely on it. But by the time March came around and we launched, we'd only had about 4 or 5 episodes ready. So by that then we were creating them week by week. You know, there'd be often we publish on a Friday morning. We'd be up till 2:00 in the morning on the Thursday getting that episode ready, ready to go out for that Friday. So it's definitely been a big career moment for sure, and that's not down to the amount of work. Like I was happy to do it and enjoyed doing it and loved doing it, but it was down to what it led to, the differences that it made. You know, New South Wales Police opened the reinvestigation, we think, as a direct consequence of us launching the podcast. But it's definitely opened up doors, opened up ideas, opened up thoughts, and you know, it's something that's going to stand out on my CV and something that I'll always talk about. And it's gone on to win so many awards, and we're so proud of it. And it's something that we'll never forget.
And your career feels like it's really just genuinely encapsulates modern media. So you've been across everything: radio, audio, podcasting, TV, online, among other things. Do you think that's kind of the requirement now of the modern producer, that the modern producer needs to be able to adapt to all forms of media to be able to kind of have longevity in this kind of industry?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, sadly, I know it's sad because there are people out there that just love audio and don't want to think visually and things like that. But the industry is getting smaller. We've got to be able to adapt. We've got to be able to look at how people are consuming content as well. And I think it's really important to have that breadth in what you can work on. I was speaking to someone the other day who was saying, "Oh, you know, I don't do video. I'm an audio producer." And I said, "You need to change that mindset. I'm really sorry to say that, but you have to think like that now. You need to learn to be able to cut video, being able to think about socials. And it's a lot, and you can't be an expert in everything. You can't be. So there are always going to be these people that are going to be better in one thing than another. But having an understanding and having a breadth of knowing, okay, this will work here. I can do this for social. I can cut this little bit of video. Like, it's all valuable. You might not be, you know, grade star student in them all, but at least you'll be able to do it and understand it a lot more. And I think a lot of that as well comes down from consuming as much content as you possibly can as well.
Well, maybe I need to take some advice on that respect, Rhys, and make this a video podcast as well. And I have to be. And we are entering kind of an interesting period as well, because podcasting for a long amount of time was quite amateur, even up to probably even 10 years ago, where there was kind of like an expectation that it was okay to kind of have like audio that was kind of average or not really put in as much into the quality. Do you feel like that kind of opinion is changing a lot more, and like people really are demanding like the same level of quality from like kind of produced television in that sense?
I think so. Like, look now, like, you know, I can go on Apple Podcasts on my phone and be able to watch a podcast on the podcast app now. So I do think, but in some ways it's kind of not downplaying audio sometimes, but you still, and I think this is what is different to Dear Rachelle, right? Is that we were thinking of the audio first. We weren't thinking of the visual first for all of it. So we editing that podcast, the hero was the absolute audio. So we're sat there editing the audio, be able to create these amazing scenes. And that's never going to go away from something that maybe video couldn't replicate, because and often people say it to me, so bloody hell, Rhys, I felt like I was there. Like when they were walking through that forest, I could hear it. I felt like I was there. And I don't think that TV can necessarily do that. You know, you've got those 2 headphones on, you'll be able to take it into that environment, and that's something that storytelling can't take away. And I think for that experience, you know, visualizing everything is not going to work, because, you know, we want this to be a podcast and people connect with it. But for interview style things, for things like that, you know, learning that visual side of things, understanding that visual side of things is important. And like, you look at YouTube and how people are consuming podcasts on YouTube now and being able to watch everything there. Like, people are fascinated by it. People like that format. And I think it's a format that we all need to adapt to, as these podcasting styles now.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned the fact that the podcast did feel very audio first. And I think it was one of the things I actually enjoyed the most about Dear Rachelle was the fact that there was an element of like theatre of the mind and kind of like establishing where you were just purely from sound. And I think it was actually the reason that I enjoyed it throughout the whole thing was purely that it felt almost, you felt like you were there. And
I'll just say on that is down to two fantastic sound designers that we had on Dear Rachelle, who are the best, I would say. They are Marty and Travis, fantastic sound designers, able to do things that a regular audio producer like me can't do. You know, we can give them these ideas, but they can come in with a fresh pair of ears. They're not thinking necessarily about the story. They're just thinking about that scene. Whereas as a producer, sometimes you're thinking about the story, blah, 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 but they're in that moment. They're kind of coming at it with a fresh pair of ears, with not thinking about what's in the next episode, because necessarily they hadn't got the next episode. They don't know what's next. They can just concentrate on that chunk there, that chunk there, that chunk there, and create those scenes. And they are bloody amazing at what they do.
Because you mentioned the whole idea of like drama and suspense, and I feel like that's what the additional audio added was this drama and suspense in the sense of like really giving it place. And I'm glad that you gave kudos to that, because I think that was really the move that kind of like for me kind of solidified it all outside of the story. And I guess a final thing that I'd love to touch on is your career has moved incredibly quickly, Rhys. So how is it that you manage to kind of like not burn out? Because I feel like it's pedal to the metal all the time for you, Rhys. How is it that you've kind of managed to maintain not only the career itself, but obviously not just getting to the point where you're like, I need to throw in the towel, this is too much?
Oh, I do have those moments. Don't get me wrong. I do have those moments. And I think, you know, I'm never, people always say, you like a holiday, Rhys? I said, yeah, I do, because we work really hard in the week and we do big projects. So, you don't be shy to take those moments to have a break or anything like that. And, you know, coming out here, it's definitely slowed down a lot. You know, there's not this, and I think as well, coming out of live news has definitely helped a lot. You know, I'd constantly be checking my phone, reading the news, checking emails has helped a lot. And I think it's just about looking after yourself, isn't it? And I think I could become too guilty at doing that sometimes. And I think one thing that I definitely have learned from 17-year-old Rhys to probably 28-year-old Rhys as I am now is that 17, 18-year-old Rhys would always say yes, always say yes, always say yes to every opportunity. I'd always say that. But now I definitely think a lot more. I've got to make sure it's the right move. I'd never just take a job for the sake of it. And I'm very grateful that I can be able to do that and have that thought now. But you definitely become like that now. And I think those younger years, you'd always think, oh, if I said no to this shift, then they won't give me another one next week. When actually you can't think like that at the end of the day. And I've come to learn this now through lots of different things in my life. But it's only a job at the end of the day, and you've got to be able to get the balance right for you. You know, your personal life, your family, and all of that stuff as well is really important. So, yeah, and I think that's the one key takeaway from this is that I would say to everybody, as much as stressful that making a podcast, making a series, making a TV show, radio show can be, it's that's all it is. You know, and you've got to look after yourselves, look after those people around you, and you'll be able to continue telling those incredible stories with looking after yourself too.
Listening to this episode of the Beyond Broadcast podcast, proudly sponsored by WIZZFX, specialists in audio branding. If you enjoyed the show, give a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. You can connect with the show on Instagram at Beyond Broadcast Pod and subscribe for updates on new episodes.